Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Usually I'm bragging because I was the person that discovered whoever the program speaker was. But today, Carol gets credit for that. And our speaker appeared in this magazine. And there's some beautiful pages of her work. And Carol and I also had the occasion to meet her at the South Street Seaport exhibit that Carol was talking about earlier. So Jacqueline, she weaves the open warp technique that it's sort of a modern, delicate, fragile, personal version of what Sally showed in the Frida Hansen work. But of course, you'll see that Jacqueline's is totally different and very exciting. So please help me welcome Jacqueline Qiu.
Hello. Thank you, everyone. Is this mic important? Am I supposed to, is this working? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, and hi to everybody who's watching virtually as well and can't be here. So my name's Jacqueline Qiu. I studied textiles at RISD and I graduated in 2022. And I've been in New York sort of ever since. I didn't start out doing fiber art or textile work growing up. I was mostly a painter and drawer, and, you know, dabbled in other mediums as I was growing up, and my parents kind of fostered my talents. But upon arriving at RISD, I actually initially selected a different major and then transferred into textiles because I was really drawn to the three-dimensional and spatial capacities of textiles. And also the way it has a relationship to the body, it has a relationship to our homes and interior spaces, and it has a relationship to, I felt like, air in a way that painting and drawing didn't, like works on paper and canvas, even though canvas is also a textile most of the times. So I'm going to first breeze through some of these small works. This one is titled Still. Thank you. This one is titled Still. Each weaving that I make is only done one at a time, so I don't work on multiple pieces at once. The process is very organic and it's sort of channeling all the different things I'm thinking about or seeing or reading, what's happening in the world, what's happening in my personal life is kind of channeled into this very labor-intensive tapestry weaving process. And because I don't really delineate the composition or the intent of the piece beforehand, I find it important to work on one at a time. So it's really like a snapshot of sort of this moment in my life, even though it's very abstract and it's not sort of like prescribing or like writing out everything that I'm thinking. So the V-shaped opening at the top is kind of like a nod to the weaving process, the shed in a floor loom. This is done on a Macomber floor loom. Yes, yeah. Okay. This one is titled Lingering. So this was sort of inspired by the pond in Prospect Park. Also sort of referencing my love for Monet. So a lot of the times my pieces are sort of in dialogue with other mediums. For example, in the last one, I was sort of looking at ukiyo-e prints and the blue sky gradations that they have. They are very beautiful, and using like a Japanese paper yarn there dyed in indigo. So sort of playing upon this relationship, this like intermedial relationship across mediums of like painting, installation, and fiber. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and this one is actually the very first one I made using this technique that I developed, and I'll dive into how I came to this specific style of tapestry weaving soon. But yeah, this was the first one where I was sort of playing with creating openings, and you can see The openings here are a bit more timid than the later ones. Later on, I sort of really open up more and play with this negative space. But in the first one, it was sort of these small little details, these little glints of space in between the weaving. Yeah, also playing with the warp striping and using different materials. Like oftentimes I think weaving is usually, I mean, when I first entered into the major, I actually struggled with the medium a lot because as a painter, you're used to working fluidly. I was used to working compositionally. I was also a representational figurative painter. So weaving really brought out my connection to abstraction in a way that painting mediums never could. Like the inherent structure of textile mediums, or maybe just any medium in general, I think when you experiment with them, they bring out a side of artistry that you didn't know you had, because oftentimes the art is not about like you enacting what you want with the medium. It's like a relationship with the tool that you've learned. So I'm really grateful that I switched majors to textiles. Yeah. Yeah, so I was playing with warp striping, adding some beading inside, and sort of letting myself play with pushing the limits of the tension of the warp, because I think I was like cinching it in certain ways that people think like shouldn't be allowed or is not good to do, because as you're like pushing things in, you know, the tension is changing. Like it's not, usually you want everything to be even and you want the edge to be super clean and the packing should be the same, but here it's like really going all over the place as I want. Yeah. So I arrived at this weaving technique by looking at 缂丝 weaving, which is a traditional weaving technique that actually first started in sort of like Central Asia and then sort of traveled along the Silk Road to China. And then it sort of developed in a more defined way in the dynasties, like for the imperial courts and all that stuff on their robes. But here are some examples of artifacts that I saw at the RISD Museum. So this was in my senior year. Yeah, but this is an altar cloth, lots of butterflies and flowers. Yeah, I was always very drawn to nature. Always, yeah, like my whole life and in my art. And I found that like often, I think it's sometimes seen as a cliche or it's not. I think nowadays people think like work about nature is sort of like tired or it's typical or like, I don't know, like that's just so broad and people are often talking about other things. But anyway, I mean, I couldn't deny that. So I still stuck with that. But I think when I looked into a lot of like old Chinese art, I found that like the importance of nature there and poetry, calligraphy, art, and just their way of like moving through life is very present. And I felt like a sort of comfort and a home in engaging with those histories. And sort of feeling like it's probably sort of embedded in me a little bit, even though I'm living in this, you know, city in New York, you still like crave certain attachments to the natural world. Yeah, this is an image of the process for 缂丝 weaving. So yeah, it's used to make robes, like apparel and altar cloths and like different interior textile goods. But in the Song Dynasty, it also developed to mimic ink paintings, very famous ink paintings. So it was this really curious like relationship where the tapestry weaving was like mimicking the gradations of paint, which is very strange because weaving is such like a regimented way of working. Like in order to attain like a gradation in weaving is like so hard. Like it's so like against the grain of the structure of weaving. And at the time at RISD, as I said, I was originally a painter and I struggled to find a connection to textiles at first. So when I found that in, you know, Chinese art history, I was really like tickled and excited. So I looked into it more. And I found that, you know, not only with painting, it also had a relationship with woodblock printing and embroidery. So that was all really fascinating to me, like the blending of mediums. Yeah, but in the past, this work was very intricate and this I think all had like, it had like a cartoon or a, sketch to follow afterwards, and then people would fill it in. Yeah, and it's interesting because they, even though they're mimicking gradations, over time, they also sort of develop specific like mark making in tapestry that is supposed to reference certain things in painting, to the point where it's not mimicking it in a way where it visually tricks you to look like it. It's more like, this is our Kusa tapestry weaves version of that technique that you see, or that motif that you see in ink painting, which I thought was really interesting. Yeah, here are some other examples. So this is all done in a weave. It's not embroidered on top. Like, the image is fully embedded in the makeup of the cloth, which is really brilliant, right? It's very delicate as well. Yeah, and 缂丝 is, it can roughly translate to carved silk. I mean, there have been several names in the past, and some historians talk about it translating to like carved colors, or yeah, which I just thought was really beautiful because it's sort of referencing, I think I'll go back a bit. If you see like in the close-up, between the colors, you can see a slit if it's like a straight, because it's not like an interlocked weft. So this slit is formed and it almost looks like it's carved or it's engraved. So again, and at the time I was actually taking a copper plate engraving class with this really brilliant teacher at RISD. So I was finding like crossover in that too, which was really beautiful. But yeah, I got really hooked on these like slits in the weavings when I looked at the artifacts, because they sort of widen over time with wear and tear, right? Like when it's first made, the slits are like, it's, they're so close together that you wouldn't really see it. But over time, as they're preserved and moved around, the slits sort of widen, maybe like a tiny bit of tearing is happening. And obviously that might be seen as like a negative, but when I saw them in person, I sort of thought it was a place for potential to make like weavings become more three-dimensional, to interact with space more, to interact with the viewer in a different way. So I really played that up in my degree project. Yeah, so these are some more examples. Yeah, and this is the back of one. So you can also see like the quality of these artifacts like varies, because it sort of depends like how well the dynasty was doing, how much money they had to give into the arts. Like, things become less intricate over time. And and this weaving technique also employs very sparingly painting on the fabric. So usually you see here, like the back of the cloth, the blue gradations on the flowers were not woven. In like the most exquisite pieces of kusla, everything would be weaving. It's more painstaking, so it's more beautiful. But here they just directly applied the paint, so it's kind of showcasing, what kind of budget, how much time they had, how valued is the piece. Yeah, but I think, I don't know, this is very beautiful too. I think like seeing the loose threads, when they go across, they bring a color across to bring it somewhere else, like tracking that line is lovely. And since I do come from like a drawing and painting background, I love when there's a sense of like a drawn line in weaving. Yeah. So this is one of the most famous figures in history. And I think it's one of those cases where they're not really sure if she's like a real person. Like they have these pieces, but I feel like it's like the historical accounts are sort of questionable, but I think she attained like the highest degree of kusa weaving in reference to having a relationship with ink painting. So sort of with achieving those like delicate subtleties. Because here you can see like it's so beautiful. Like the subtlety of the leaves and this like gradation is insane. Oh, thread. Yeah, so here you can kind of see the slits better. And you can see they're even like, they're mimicking the stamp. But this is all woven. It's not stamped on top. And people also mimicked calligraphy works in weaving. And it's just crazy because like the motion of calligraphy, like what you do with your body is so the opposite of weaving. Like calligraphy is like you put a mark down on the paper and there's no going back. Like it's not like Western painting, oil painting, where you put a mark on and you layer and you mess around with it. It's really like a one shot, like you only have one chance to get it right. So to be able to make like an impressive piece of calligraphy, it's really about like practicing constantly. And then sometimes you'll get that work that's like the one and you got it. But weaving is different. Like you can undo everything and building a stroke, you're actually building it like a printer, like one at a time. So yeah, that was fascinating to me. And like especially being like a contemporary artist, like I think there's so much dialogue about like interdisciplinary art. And maybe we don't realize like how much that was happening in the past as well. Yeah. Yeah, so this was sort of an interesting thing. I think I'll read this out loud. I was reading like different academic papers on this technique, which there aren't that many because I think because it's in between mediums, like it tends to get lost in the pedagogy, I guess. But so this is about the most famous 缂丝 weaver, who was a woman. Zhu Kezhou was a weaver whose work are the first signed tapestries in China to use tapestry weave to depict pictorial compositions rather than patterns. Her pictorial silk tapestry weavings, 缂丝, created painting-like compositions. While weaving was often traditionally associated with women and considered feminine work, painting and the making of images was associated with men. Thereby, Zhu's innovation in using a medium associated with women's labor to produce images in the style of paintings is groundbreaking on a number of levels. So this is a quote by Alexandra Tunstall, and she wrote like I think her dissertation on 缂丝, and I really referenced her text very heavily when I was researching about this technique. Yeah. Okay, I'll read the next one too, since it's there. Zhu Kezhou was a native of Yunjian, and she lived during the Southern Song Dynasty. She was famous for women's work, weaving. The exquisite skill shown in her works with figures, trees, rocks, flowers, and birds is almost supernatural. She was highly esteemed during a certain period, and her pieces that survive are very rare. This small picture is full of quiet elegance, the one on the bottom in the slide, and expresses the taste and culture of a famous artist of the past. It has essential and natural beauty. As in, I think the literal translation, because this was originally written in Chinese. So literally, she has done away with feminine artifice. Her skill is so extraordinary. She handled the silk as if handling a brush. Her technique was such that people today cannot even dream of seeing such skill. This work should be treasured. So this is somebody in the past who was sort of like cataloging her works and wrote a little note on it. But yeah, it's interesting how certain techniques are sort of attributed to different genders. And I think when I was at RISD, I was researching, there's a saying in Chinese where like men till and women weave back in the day. Like men went to the farms and women, like the woven loom, the loom was like a sort of centerpiece of the house because, they were making their own clothes. So it was very important. And it was, the woman's job to make, I guess the fabric goods. But like, it's interesting because in like India per se, like the weaving loom, like working on a loom is considered a men's labor. So I feel like all these divisions, and like I think embroidery is considered, or like different textile tasks are considered as like women's labor. So it's just like I'm bringing up that dynamic in India because I'm just saying like these sort of designations of what gender does what is all kind of very arbitrary and constructed. And we shouldn't like limit ourselves to that or romanticize that. Like, I think overly attaching like, I don't know, a female identity to like textile work is in some ways like, limiting yourself. So building community is important, but also like don't accidentally pigeonhole yourself in a certain space. And yeah, that's something that contemporary artists have to navigate a lot as well. Yeah. Yeah, so this is just a side to side, like the one on the right is a painting and the one on the left is weaving. And these are both paintings, and I'm just pulling this up because my own weavings were very influenced by painting. And growing up, I mostly studied like Western painting, mostly was oil painting. When I was 9 years old, for a little bit, I think for 1 year, my parents brought me to a calligraphy and traditional Chinese painting teacher, and I really treasure that memory. But it only happened for like 1 year. It was like in the basement of his house, and I would get driven over to his home, and he would teach me. But I feel like some of those things he taught me managed to stick, sort of like the deftness of a stroke, like the gesture and the confidence you need to possess to like paint on silk or shred paper. It's different from painting on canvas or board, you know. Yeah, so I'm also showcasing here 2 examples of, there's many different styles in traditional Chinese painting, and here I have gongbi, which is much more precise and delineated, and xieyi, which is, xieyi actually translates to writing thoughts, which I think is really beautiful. Yeah, so one is much more gestural and loose, and the other is very controlled and tight. Okay. Yeah, so here are some of those paintings that are framed that I did when I was 9. In my house. Yeah, 9 years old. I mean, I think the framing does a lot for it. You know, that fabric, I didn't weave that fabric. You know, that was taken, my teacher took it to China and they framed it there. But I even took inspiration from this format. Like I think of the weavings as scrolls. Like, you know, when you set up a floor loom, you have the, oh my gosh, what's the word for the beam? The beam.
Apron.
Sure, apron rod, but I think I meant the beams. Like, you know, it rolls like a scroll. So I kind of thought of the warp as sort of like this long scroll of paper. It's kind of like our paper. Yeah, and I really loved the fact that these like works on paper are framed with cloth. Like that's not something you really see in America. Like this is a very, I mean, there's long histories of this in like Asia. But I think it's so beautiful. Yeah. So I started doing some sort of experiments. So this was woven on a floor loom, and I was actually using the shred paper that I would normally do, or one would normally do Chinese painting on, but I dyed them with natural dyes. And I also painted on, it's kind of hard to see, but this piece here, the sort of smaller painting is actually done on a piece of tianzi writing paper, which is like a Chinese character writing paper you use when you're like a child. So this was sort of at the beginning of my degree project, I was sort of looking back into, I was thinking a lot about like Chinese language and journaling as well, because I think like language is something you have to keep up and a relationship you have to foster, or else it like slips away from you. So I was pondering on that, but I was doing a lot of paintings in my teacher's gardens in Providence. So I would visit and I would bring my watercolors and just sit there in that space for a long time and then do a quick sketch and then cut it up and weave them. Yeah, and the borders here are sort of referencing the way the paintings are framed. Yeah, here's some more experiments with paper weaving, playing with how the grid sort of obstructs and glitches a painted image. Some process. This is marigolds. Yeah, thinking about, I was playing around screen dividers or how to separate spaces in beautiful ways. This one I actually translated paper weaving into digital print on silk. So again, like sort of playing with like this intermedial mode of making, sort of a nod to like being inspired by Kesi, like they're like mimicking woodblock print, embroidery, calligraphy, ink painting. You know, I thought that was really fun. Okay. So I'm going back into sort of more recent work. But this is sort of some sketches that fed into a piece I did in Iceland, a residency at the textile center there. I feel like maybe you guys have heard of this residency. There aren't that many textile residencies out there, but yeah, so I was in Iceland for 3 months with a lot of time. I was really, really grateful for that time. A lot of time on my hands to sort of sit with the surrounding space and nature. So my practice is, as I said, it's very organic and it's sort of responding to my life and the surroundings and the natural environment. So it's built in this very like stream of consciousness way where I'm sort of, I guess in a way, like collaging like what I'm seeing or feeling over like a long period of time. And it ends up coming together into this one singular piece. But I feel like each section is really like devoted or its own thing because I don't know what the composition is as I start until I finish. Yeah, so I think there's like a level of dedication or detail that I put in that is maybe a bit unusual. Or yeah, but you can see sort of how these two sketches helped feed into this piece. So this one actually, I should have. So this one is when I first started thinking a bit more compositionally, but you can see it's still very, very loose. Yeah. Yeah, so this like that little corner is like this part. Yeah. So this is it in process on the loom.
Is this one titled? Do you have a title?
Oh yes, this one is titled Lulling. Lulling.
And how large is it?
I'd say like the woven section is like about like this tall, like a little shorter than me, and then the tassels sort of give extra length. Yeah. Yes, but that took 3 months of having no other no other obligations. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm sort of pulling up these Chinese paintings to sort of see like there's these sort of mountainous forms that I feel like might have influenced me subconsciously. I wasn't looking at these paintings at the time, but I just think it's interesting to sort of parallel that negative space. And I was also looking at Western painters, so a lot of inspiration from Ophelia, this Ophelia painting, and not just like the visual of it, but the emotions behind it, sort of like being pushed to a point where insanity is more comforting than existing in society, and being in nature, and letting yourself be held by nature. And this painting by Caspar David Friedrich. Yeah. And then I have a little I have a bit of writing that I want to read. There are so many spontaneous bodies of water in Iceland. Waterfalls, little creeks, ponds, and puddles. When the sun hits, it reflects a blinding, harsh white, making a mirror of light in unique silhouettes. Roofs reflecting the sun looked like mirrors in the ground. Multiple times the day I arrived, I mistook roofs for still water. Mirrors pointed to the sky. Precarious reflections, but they were homes. There was something beautiful in mistaking a ceiling for such an amorphous element, to think of a home changing like water. So this was taken on the beach nearby, the Blondus Beach. I had 2 friends who helped carry it out there with me, and I'm very grateful to them. Yeah, this is another scene. So I actually went out twice. We went out during sunset, and then we went back to the residency home. And then in the middle of the night, I was like, "Oh, can I borrow your camera and go out again?" And then my friends were like, "We'll come with you." So I'm very grateful because I'm sure it wouldn't have happened without them. Like I'm sure I wouldn't have figured it out on my own. Yeah, but I love how like the tapestry almost becomes like to me, it kind of feels like a creature in this shot. It kind of feels like a creature that's been like strapped and constrained. But it's blowing in the wind. This was like, fully in the elements. Like there was wind. I'm glad nothing happened. Sometimes people think it looks so fragile, And I think it's more that it's malleable and it's flexible and it's movable. And I don't think, technically, I think things that are very hard are actually more fragile than things that are soft. Yeah. So this is back in New York. I'm no longer in Iceland. Yeah, so this was a piece. This one is titled Well. Yeah. Maybe I'll talk. And the larger moments of negative space also came from looking at Chinese painting. So the slits at the beginning were from looking at Ke artifacts. And those slits like technically aren't really supposed to be there. Like they aren't supposed to be widened and noticeable. But I was really fascinated by it. And then I thought back to the concept of liu bai, which means leave blankness in Chinese art. And I think it's just like in every way, like leaving blankness is important in painting, in traditional Chinese painting. There's no white. You can't like apply white. So the empty areas are the paper showing through. So there's a lot of like reservation and like a sense for balance and like holding back that you need to have when you're painting. And I feel like this is a concept that doesn't exist in like Western aesthetics, like blankness, emptiness, or like quiet moments. And I just feel like as a metaphor, it's really important as well. Like living in New York, it's so busy, it's so claustrophobic, and it's like, how do you find those like empty moments where you can relax and then also you can think for yourself? Like same with like all the media we're seeing. Like I feel like people like it's like they're trying to stop us from thinking, it's really dangerous. Like I think empty space or like empty time is like so critically important. So I'm kind of exploring that thought in my artworks as well. Yeah. This piece was kind of looking at certain like layers of grief that I was thinking about at the time. So like, I feel like for grief, you need to give yourself a lot of space. So there's sort of like there's this well or this pool that can like hold the emotion. Yeah. This is the most recent piece that I finished. This one is called Shallow Grave. I think I'm still workshopping the title, but right now it's titled Shallow Grave. Yeah, and this was inspired by sort of time in bathtubs, actually. So it's sort of looking at like the solitary time in bathtubs, because it was my first time living alone in New York and I wasn't going out as much, and I was just pondering like, what access do I have to the elements? And I think like access to water, even in like a tub in your bathroom, is sometimes that's the best you can get. And I think it's like a lot of people like go to the shower for comfort, like when they're overwhelmed or it's been a long day. Like it's a way to connect with your body. It's a way to detach from like other things you have to worry about. So I was really exploring like the bathtub space that was sort of like a crutch for me during this certain period in New York. But yeah, also like a lot of different like movies, movies I'm watching or things I'm reading. Yeah, relationships, like what's going on, all feed into the piece. Yeah. Okay. And this is my most recent work in progress. So this is pretty accurate to the state it's in. I'm currently on a studio grant, so I have a large space. I used to work in my apartment, so it was in my common space, so I had no common space, no work-life separation. And I feel like that's important to have as well. Yeah, so I'm very lucky to be in this grant, and there are these really large white walls and I can drill into them freely. So I thought I would just make sort of a version of a frame loom and work really large scale. But here, like I'm breaking sort of the generic rectangle. And I'm also sort of creating different anchor points within the weaving. Like the warp doesn't go straight up and down vertically consistently. I sort of break it in between. Like you can see here are all the nails. So all the small, all the small black dots. All the small black dots are where I inserted a nail because I sort of I needed to anchor the thread there. Yeah, so it's been very freeing and very fun to work this way. Yeah, and it's different because since the work is so painterly, in the past, I think there was always this real test and like challenge to myself to be able to make a compositional work without a predetermined plan, but in a medium where you cannot go back. So like each mark I made is there permanently, and I have to trust my instincts to know that I will continue weaving in a way where like the last thing that I weave will correspond and work well with the first thing I wove. But this doesn't have that problem as much. This one is much more fluid. It's much more like it's not actually working with paint on canvas, but like the way I can think is more similar to that. It's a lot more freeing. Yeah, but it's been a lot of fun. Yeah, this one is working with a lot of vintage mohair that I actually picked up from like a small fashion brand that I think like moved out of the country. So they were getting rid of some supplies. So I think it's like really fun to sort of pick up the materials I'm using organically as well. Like I'm not controlling, like I only use cotton or something like that. Like I think it's fun to experiment, especially at this stage when I'm so early in my journey, I guess. Yeah. Yeah. Hey. I suppose that's it. Let me see. I can keep talking. Is it? Maybe we should have more time before the Q&A, huh? Or the Q&A, should we do the Q&A at 2? Yeah, okay. I have more to say. I have a lot to say. Yeah. Yeah, so I'll go on to more, I guess I'll reveal more of the inspiration behind this piece. It's actually referencing a sketch, and you can see that sketch in the corner. I sort of put it behind the electrical wires, but it's referencing a sketch I actually did like 3 years ago at Anderson Ranch. I don't know if you guys know Anderson Ranch. It's sort of like an art residency or art workshop space in Colorado. But it was my summer of junior year. And I was doing these workshops, and there was one teacher who did a meditation exercise, like a visualization meditation exercise, where they had you envision a space and sort of envision you walking through it. And it was for 15 minutes, and it was a guided meditation. And I had actually gone through like my first like end of a serious relationship at the time. So I was doing this meditation exercise, and then I started crying for like 15 minutes with all these strangers around. But it was interesting to see like what sort of environment I made up. It was sort of like if you imagine like the bank of like maybe a bank of like a pond or a river, or maybe more like the ocean, but like grassy. But then imagine all the water has disappeared and it's sort of been hollowed out. So you're looking at like a lot of mud and dirt, and I was like walking through this like cavity in the ground, and then I was like really able to process my emotions in a way. And like I think that's what my art practice is about. Like even when I was using different mediums, it was always about being able to reflect and like feel like the unnavigatable sensations or like moments of life. So I did that sketch in response. The teacher did this exercise called like blob paintings, where you just sort of like plopped paint on really haphazardly and then made like a bunch of them on sheets of paper. And then afterwards you would go back with like maybe more specific like drawing utensils or paint, and then you would like pull a composition out of that like random blob of paint. And I'd never worked that way, and it was really generative. So I don't know, I recommend, I recommend you guys try. It's really fun. Yeah, so I made that small sketch and I made some prints based on it, but then I never really revisited it. It never turned into a full composition. So I was in the studio space and I was sort of looking back on old sketches and I pulled it out. It's been 3 years. And it was interesting because the composition still really spoke to me, but the like emotional content like didn't affect me at all anymore. So like the imagery was still resonant. And you guys can't see the sketch, but I think you might be able to pull it out from the tapestry. It's sort of like it's a body laid out on a landscape, but the body is also sort of like falling apart and a bit dismembered and like sinking into the space. And I think like with a lot of what has been going on in the world, like the people's ability to access land or have an attachment to their home, you know, people are like fleeing their homes and things are being burned to the ground. Yeah, so it's interesting that this image that was made with a completely different thing in mind sort of now spoke to like different things I was pondering on in this moment. Yeah, so I thought I would bridge the two and sort of pull them together. And I was reading this book titled The Body in Pain, The Making and Unmaking of the World. And the beginning chapter is actually talking about, it's sort of breaking down what happens in torture or in pain. The first thing it brought up was how like physical pain is not communicatable to other people. Like it's not something you can express in words. And it also sort of alienates you from your own body. And then the second point they were making was that such a magnitude of pain, like literally untethers you from your life and from the environment. So it was interesting. Like the book was saying when somebody sort of, I guess, says what the torturer wants them to say, it's not so much like an A to B to C where I'm in so much pain, I can't take it anymore, so I'm going to do what you want to confess information. They were saying what happens when you're in so much pain is that your ability to feel connected to like reality is literally like is like gone. So your world is like unmade. So that's why what you do like doesn't really matter anymore. And that made so much sense to me because when I first started making these weavings, it was during COVID and it was a very isolating time. And as I said, the way I draw imagery is kind of from my surroundings. And it was kind of like a self-protective measure to tether myself to my surrounding environment. So my art practice sort of developed in a way where I was consciously like through my senses, because I think the weaving, I don't know, I feel like there's like a musicality to it. And it you know, it moves in the air. But I found like tethering myself to like tangible environment very grounding. So it made sense to me that when somebody is being tortured or losing their grasp on something, they no longer feel any connection to like space or environment or like maybe people in their life. Yeah, so the sort of subtext of the title of that book is The Making and Unmaking of the World, because they're saying that's what is sort of happening in those contexts. And I thought that was really interesting in reference to weaving as well, because I think a lot of my works, even the ones on the loom, there's a tension where people feel like they can imagine it falling apart. Like I'm always trying to make people think of how it's made. And on the flip side, that also means they can imagine how it unravels. Again, it's like, yeah, I love that weaving. You can like see every decision that was made there. Like, I think it's very transparent in a way that other mediums aren't. Like, you know, if you work with clay, it's layered on top. Like weaving, like you see every structural, like relationship and color and composition relationship all there. Even in like felted works, you know, the fibers are tangled. You're not seeing like each thing, but this is like every single decision I ever made over the course of like 3 or 5 months is like very plainly on view. Yeah, but I just think the making and unmaking was interesting for this piece because I think this one has a sort of like explosive energy and mark making to it where you can imagine it sort of coming together and also like blowing apart at the same time. Yeah, and I was sort of thinking of the contents in that book when I decided to emphasize that.
Talk a little bit about the Iceland experience.
Sure. Is it okay to go into Q&A now?
Or-
Okay.
Yeah, are you, I don't mean to rush you.
No, I am sort of, I'm done. Yeah. Are we going to start out with, oh, sorry. Are we going to start out with just the questions here or are
Do
we
you have a
looking
couple
through the
from
chats?
online?
Okay, you're the one moderating. Okay,
Sorry, I
perfect.
just- I didn't-
No, I wasn't sure. Thank you.
That was my own question.
Okay, so speaking about the Iceland experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you more interested in the hearing more about my time there or like the practicalities of being able to do the residency or what that process?
I think more your creative.
Okay.
Affected your creative.
Okay, yeah. So I had graduated from RISD. I moved to New York pretty soon after. And it was a big transition because, I mean, Providence was also a city, but there was a lot of teachers with lovely home gardens and, you know, it's a lot quieter and there is a lot of nature around and it's pleasant to walk around. In New York, walking around feels like you're like being assaulted sensorially. So it was an adjustment to learn how to make work there, but I managed. But I applied for this residency and I decided to stay 3 months to really fully immerse myself in the space. And it was really, really generative. I think having that amount of like empty time was like so rare. Like, I don't think I could have gotten it like any other way. I mean, unless I did another residency that was equally unstructured because they only had like 2 lectures per month and they maybe taught you how to spin wool, sorry. And we also did participate in like the sheep herding at the ends of the, I forget the, yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
The end of September.
Yeah. And that was really fun. But yeah, the landscape is just like totally different. I think like sometimes you forget like how much like the quality of light or, I mean, Iceland was also, you know, it's strange. They have in the summer, they have like almost like 23 hours of sunlight. I was there in the fall, so I caught like a tiny bit of that like really bright light. Like it was super bright still at like 9 p.m. Yeah, but then afterwards I also see it turn very dark where there was only maybe like 5 hours of sunlight. But yeah, the landscape is much more barren and unpopulated and not so dense. And also like in general, I think like I might be wrong. Like people don't have like fences. Like you can walk on anybody's like lawn. Like the houses are there and like, you know, you might feel a little strange, but it's not like private property where like you're afraid and you're not supposed to step there. So having that relationship to land was like really beautiful. Obviously, I was still like an outsider and you want to be respectful and careful, but just it felt so much freer. Yeah. what else? I mean, it was lovely to have like people of all ages at the residency and people from like all over the world. Like only a couple of them were Americans, a lot of them were European. And it was really great to speak with them and converse. And I also just think like making an environment where there wasn't a teacher, where you really just have to trust yourself, was great as well. And trust yourself for such a long period of time. And it's not just about teachers, it's about not having your family there, and not having familiar friends around. I mean, my final month, two RISD classmates ended up coming along, and that was nice. But it was my first time traveling alone and being on my own for so long, and just having to like be with my own brain without like a job to go to, without, so it's like I couldn't, like, I really had to listen to how I was feeling. And maybe, you know, how I was feeling wasn't the best. And I needed time to sort of just like feel that and grapple with it. And I think it like comes across in the piece, you know, like I was referencing Ophelia and, you know, all these different things. Yeah.
I've seen photos of Iceland, it's always blues, so I was
Yeah.
wondering if that connect with the colors that you used in.
Yeah, definitely. Like there was a lot of, I love the water, because the town I was staying in had like a really big, like a small lake and river that like connected to the ocean. And there was even like, there was this divide in the water. Wait, maybe I'll go to the piece really quick. Okay. There was this divide in the water where a certain portion of the water was melting from like glacier water, and then a certain portion was, I guess, the still water, but there was like a color difference, like if you looked at the ocean, there was like a demarcation of like pale blue and then like a deep blue. And then you would watch it like fading. Like these are things like I've never seen before, you know? So I do think being in that place was beautiful. But in this piece, like a lot of it is kind of like the sky and water are sort of like blurring the boundaries and meshing together. Like you don't know if what I'm depicting is, I guess, is water or sky. I saw, you know, the Northern Lights there, Aurora Borealis. So that's kind of, I mean, I think that one you can see is like, this is kind of referencing that section. Yeah, but also in that town, one of the only things to do was go to the outdoor pool and hot tub. So I was doing that a lot, my 3 months in Iceland. And I feel like you can see how I tried to like carry that over into New York, because the piece after is about me and my like the bathtubs in my apartment. And obviously it's not the same. It's not as amazing as like sitting in an outdoor hot tub looking at the Northern Lights with your friend. But yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I had some technical questions about the bathtub piece,
Uh-huh.
just because I wasn't sure what I was gonna do. The first is just how big is it?
I think it's similar, like the
Similar,
woven portion is kind of this tall. Yeah.
And I guess I'm just curious about, in the center where it's still very transparent, but it looks like you're picking up some weft threads. Can you describe a little bit what's going on there?
Yeah. So this piece actually uses a lot of paper yarn. I bought paper yarn from Habu Textiles. I don't know if you know that site, but this sort of,
Here to there,
Yeah.
there's
a semi-transparent paper yarn that's woven there. So it's picking up like the painted warp in a different way compared to just the warp floats, but it's just plain weave. So it's really about the materiality of the yarn, yeah, and the lighting.
That's very cool.
Thank you.
Someone's asking if you could repeat the question.
Oh, yes. So somebody had just asked, the question I just answered, somebody was asking about the middle section of this woven piece where the colors of the warp are picking up in a different way. And I was explaining that it was because I used a semi-transparent paper yarn for the weft.
Could you talk about your choice of color as well? I mean, you've talked about the choice of yarn being organic and how your work evolves organically as
your choice of color also an organic process?
So the question was asking me to elaborate on how I choose the colors in the weaving and whether or not the colors are also an organic process, like the imagery.
Is it informed by your painting background?
Yeah, it's definitely informed by my painting background, but I think it's not so much that like painting uses color in a certain way and then I translated it into weaving. I think it's more that being somebody who painted observationally and I guess not observationally for like 10, 15 years before I started weaving, that sort of like color knowledge and intuition and sense carries over, like it's a part of me. So yeah, those skills are there. And then I think as I'm weaving, the color is organic. I do like very small watercolor and gouache sketches to almost form like a, I guess like a inspiration board or like a jumping off point or a suggestion of color to guide me. But I never stick to it. Like it changes a lot. It might be like a sort of like tint or suggestion of a color scheme in the background. Like I remember for this piece, I did a sketch of cherry blossoms and the background had this teal to red gradation. And then I only realized afterwards that that teal to red gradation kind of exists in this piece and potentially, you know, maybe doing that sketch helped influence it. I did have it on the wall on the side. Yeah, so I think a lot of things are not consciously decided, but there's just a color sense you have if you've been working with color for so long. Yeah, in any medium, yeah.
The last piece that you're putting the nails in the wall, are you gonna take that down and how is that logistically gonna
Yeah,
keep it intact?
so the question is, how am I going to logistically deinstall and reinstall this piece with all the nails in it? That decision is still in process. I did, no, but I definitely know how, like, it's easy if you just weave like, somewhat solidly on the edge, then it's fine. You know, then you can just roll it up, then it's very easy. But if I want it to be like hollow there, then I could either like weave just a little bit, like a little header at the top edge, and then just use that. And I just have to, all these tapestries, I just roll them up to transport. So it's actually a lot more convenient than like a giant work on canvas or panel. It's just a roll. I can even like fold it in my suitcase if I have to. It's so light, it's so nice, yeah. But if I wanted to keep this sort of like, if I wanted to keep warp floats at the top edge, then I would have to like have those screws there. And I was actually talking to the gallerists that I'm going to have a show with. And I was pitching this, like, would it be possible to preserve this screw installation? Because I think the screws kind of, like seeing those anchor points is interesting. And I feel like that it's sort of like a tension with like the softness of the fiber. Like there's sort of a conversation that's being had there. And she was quite generous and she was like, you know, I'm, you know, I let artists do what they want in my space, but you have to understand, like at a certain point, you cannot be installing everything you make yourself. Because I think the way I've been operating is very like, I do everything. Like when I set something up in a gallery, I'm the one who's installing, I'm the one who's delivering it, I'm the one who's packaging it for them. And it's like when you keep working at a higher level, like you need to be able to work with other people, like museum staff. Number one, you have to make it easy for them and you have to be able to trust them with it. So that's definitely something I have to consider. So yeah, I'm not too worried about what I'm going to do. Like I think the main takeaway is just if you stabilize something with a header, then you're good. And you can use a yarn that's like pretty like not visible, I feel. So it can still have that sort of like floaty drifting edges quality. Like it doesn't have to be like a black border that you like weave at the top and bottom. But yeah, I feel like it would be cool if it was all with these screws, but I understand like who's gonna do that? Like nobody wants to do that. Like nobody wants me to do that. So we'll see. Yeah, but I'm not really worried about it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have another question about this piece. So it's kind of hard to see from the picture because it's like from standing back. But
Mhm.
I've seen your work in person and it's very small and delicate and intricate like that. So are you still doing that small, delicate little patches and little squares on this big piece, this big scale, or is everything scaling up? Like you're doing bigger patches, bigger yarn, bigger.
Okay. So the question was, they said they had seen my work in person in the past and it was very, very intricate. And they were wondering if for this larger piece, does it still have that same quality of intricacy? I would say no. It would be for like many different reasons. Number one, like the tension of the warp here is not as consistent. Yeah, it's much looser, and I also kept it looser because I wanted what I was working on to be more accurate to what it would be. Because when I'm taking it off a loom, I always forget, but once it's taken off, it sort of like shrinks a tiny bit and it's not as like taut. And for this piece, I kind of wanted to know the stability of the piece while I was working on it. So when I looped the warp, I kept it looser, almost loose to the point that it's like the way it would sit if the nails weren't there when it's done. Because I kind of wanted to know what was happening and like the structural stability without like taking it off by accident and something happens in a way I didn't expect. But also I just think working, I actually, this is a piece I didn't include. One of my first like really large scale pieces on the loom, I realized that like working with such fine yarns on a bigger weave doesn't translate the best. Like I think if I'm working large scale, I should play to that structure. So instead of like working super intricately, I'm exploring like what is it like to make like a big gesture, like a big mark with the yarn. And I could make like this piece as delicate as those other ones, but I just think like that's not what this structure and exploration is like calling for me to do. So this is newer territory. It's much more like it's expressionistic in a way. Yeah, so to answer your question, it's not as intricate as the ones you've seen in the past, I think. Yeah, it has a different quality.
I was really interested in your discussion of the historical Chinese techniques, and I was impressed with all the images you showed. I was curious about the surviving artifacts we have, given that textiles are sometimes not well preserved across centuries, and it looked like you had artifacts going back at least maybe 500 years.
Yeah.
Where you know, I was just curious what you know of like what survived.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I. Oh yes, thank you. The question was, I had a lot of images of artifacts, and that was interesting because, you know, we were just wondering like textiles oftentimes isn't super well preserved. So they were asking what I know about the surviving historical artifacts. I mean, what I know is that the RISD Museum had these artifacts. So there are some that are well preserved. I think a lot of works are like in Taiwan. There's also a lot of works in mainland China as well. But yeah, I'm sure like many of them have been destroyed, but I just guess there's enough, and there are people who have saved pieces and they've landed from like private collections into museum collections, and they take care of them. Yeah. So they have experts on hand. This is like something, this is also a topic I want to look into more as well, because yeah, conservation is coming up a lot. I feel like it's one of the things that like fiber art is like, has to fight, because people will say like, oh, it's so delicate, or I don't know how to take care of it, or people aren't used to, at least again, this is in an American context, people aren't used to like having the bandwidth to like take care of a textile that seems less like indestructible. But yeah, there's conservators out there. I'm gonna try to learn more about it too.
Just that the Met also does have.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is
some-
there like, can I go to the Met and request to see pieces? Is that a thing? Yeah,
Probably at the
I should.
Antonio Roddy Textile Center. at the
Yeah.
Met.
Okay,
They might very well have some robes like that.
I'm
that
sure they have.
periodically do go on exhibit.
Yeah.
But I was quite interested in one of the panels of the old Chinese.
Maybe this one?
Yes, that one, where you mentioned that over time, some of the details were painted on,
Mhm.
okay, rather than woven. And I was wondering if they might have been painted on, if they were being, if those were for robes or for pieces, for, say, lower ranking officials. And if the higher ranking ones or members of, the royal family would have the woven ones, or if we know that.
Yeah, okay. So the question was, looking at these pairs of sleeve bands where the certain elements were painted on, and they were wondering if the quality of the craft associated with like a certain social status. I think that's likely, but at this point, this is all me speculating, because I don't know the facts on the top of my head. But I think from what what I was like looking at are the pieces that were less embellished or dedicatedly made. It was from like a time period where the dedication or flourishing of that craft was waning. So what I'm seeing is not examples of pieces that were made during the same time, but just of a lower standing. And I feel like if somebody's status was not high enough, like maybe they would have had embroidered works instead, because embroidery is easier to do than 刻丝. So I don't know if they would have like had different tiers of quality of 刻丝, but it's possible. Yeah, that's a good question. I should look into that. Yeah.
So a few online questions. Serena is asking, thank you so much. Your work is so energizing. Would you be okay with sharing your email?
Oh, sure.
I can put that in the chat
Okay.
afterwards.
I can share my email, but I do have to apologize. I am very busy, and if I don't have the bandwidth, I won't be able to reply. Yeah, because I'm just, I'm emailing so many different people navigating the spaces in New York. So I'll do my best, but yeah.
And Serena also asked, about what relationship writing or text has to your practice? Do you see any kind of resonance in these kinds of
Compositions? Oh, where writing is paired with an image?
Let's see, about what relationship writing text has to Jacqueline's practice? If she sees any kind of resonance in these kinds of compositions.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely have been thinking about writing a lot. It's like, I'd say it's a craft I haven't given as much time to. So that's why it hasn't appeared as much. I think it's important. I still think like visual work I'm somebody who wants the visual work or the installation to stand on its own. I don't like when work sort of has to have text for people to be impacted by it. I want the work to stand on its own and have like a visceral reaction, like just automatically from viewing the piece. But yeah, I think writing is important and it does help people access your thoughts more and just like being more generous to the viewer and understanding like everybody has different like amounts of knowledge of maybe the craft or things I'm referencing. So being able to walk people through is important. And yeah, I do think a lot of my work is quite poetic, but I don't necessarily like have a relationship with writing poetry, like not a very developed relationship or even with reading poetry. But it's, yeah, it's definitely something I want to do. But I've found that like recently I've just been reading more books from like writers who like their writing practice is really their art practice and really just critical thinking and like reflecting on the world. And I think that has been very important and generative. Yeah.
Serena, who asked that, she's in response to you about the museum. She said you can, if you reach out to a curator or research center of a department. There's another question from Allie. What led you to change mediums from painting to weaving?
Sorry, I'm writing down the method and curator.
Serena is the one who asked for your email address.
Okay.
So,
you speak to curator or the research department of.
you know what? I will send you Serena's email.
Okay. Sorry, could you repeat the new question?
Sure. What led you to change mediums from painting to weaving?
Yeah. I'll be fully transparent. When I changed majors, I was worried about jobs and I was also worried about getting my money's worth at RISD. So I was in the illustration department and I found that I was making a lot of work that sort of existed in the fine art realm, or just didn't really have a practical use. Like I wasn't making editorial illustration. I was making this work. I was painting and drawing. And the department was quite like open. So I felt like I wasn't getting enough. I just felt like I wasn't learning enough. And I felt that I can continue drawing and painting on my own. So if I'm going to this school and paying all this money, let me like use all these tools that like I had no relationship to fiber art beforehand. So, and RISD's textiles department is like amazing. Like they have a jacquard loom, they have dobby looms, they have industrial knitting, they have like single bed, double bed knitting, fabric silk screen, embroidery machine. So I thought I would go there. And yeah, and as I said before, I thought textiles had like a lot more, I feel like it like touched lives in a much more expansive way. Yeah, like it can exist in a fine art context, but I feel like the impact and comfort it gives us in everyday life, we really take for granted as well. And I thought that was like a beautiful thing to ponder on. And also like, there's a lot more going on with the materials where it's like connecting to the world and I guess different industries, like, the fashion industry is so terrible and it's like how, I guess, like reflecting on how we want to interact with the world and like what's important and the things we use, like what's the cost, not just to the environment, but to the people who are making it. Like, how do we value the people who are making our clothes? And I think it's really easy to say that like you don't think that labor is like skilled labor, but they make like the people in like China and India who are making this stuff are like manufacturing at a scale that like European or Western countries could never emulate. Like the people are not as skilled in like making those. They don't put it, but I feel like we don't perceive it that way. But yeah, I just think there's a lot of complex, gnarly questions in there. And I think it's like important, and it was more inspiring to think about. And it was nice to like, I don't know, I think it was good that I had to think about those things.
Last question, from online, what's the name of the book? The pain book that you.
Oh, what's the name of the book? The book is called The Body in Pain, The Making and Unmaking of the World by Elaine Scarry, I think is the author's name.
You also mentioned a gallery show. Are you able to say when and where that will be?
Not yet, but I can like share the information with the guild maybe, and then have them send it out. Yeah. Just because it's slated for January 2026 unless things change. So there's no rush. It's still in process. Yeah.
That's all from online.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone.
Very much. And I hope everybody comes back in April to join us for the next meeting.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. It was really wonderful.
Thank you.
Very, very good.